My name is Niels Gregersen. I am professor of systematic theology at the University of Copenhagen, and I'm also the president of the International Society for Science and Religion. So it's my privilege to moderate this discussion. It has been a very filled and also very exciting lecture that we have heard right now again from Iain McGilchrist, and also the response from Michael Reiss, who is also the immediate past president of ISSR. So we know one another well. And I just want to thank you, Iain McGilchrist, for this lecture, which was very moving, very illuminative. And this is the lecture that we are going to discuss today. I just was very fond also to see the scope also of the religion side expressed during your lecture, from Taoism, Lao Tse, and to Hinduism and Buddhism and Judaism, and of course also aspects of the Christian tradition. Thank you very much for this. Now the kind of little liturgy that is going to take place here is that I'm now going to invite our three respondents in turn: Dr. Mari van Emmerik, Chris Oldfield, and at the end, Marius Dorobantu. And we have talked a little about the time limit, and we will do that. I will then go back to you, Iain McGilchrist, to ask about your response, and also ask Michael Reiss if he has any further remarks. So I think I should simply pass on the word to you, Mari van Emmerik, and you are placed at in Oxford, I think, and have worked with the intersection of science and religion, using both religious studies, psychology, philosophical anthropology. You also have a background in linguistics and cognitive science, and you are now at Pembroke College, Oxford, and I'm very happy that you will be our first respondent. So I will simply give the word to you, please.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. McGilchrist, for this rich and thought-provoking lecture. It's really an honor to have this opportunity to reflect on it here. And I would like to respond by exploring three interconnected themes that resonated deeply with me and that resonate with my own work, which are spiritual yearning, embodiment, and the ethical challenges of artificial intelligence. Well, heeding the advice of Dr. McGilchrist to follow the language of poetry, let me begin with what one of my favorite poets, Mary Oliver, wrote in her essay Upstream. Attention is the beginning of devotion. This is a simple yet profound statement, and it captures the spirit of this lecture, revealing something truly essential about the relationship between how we attend to the world and what we come to see and know as true. Oliver understood that attention is not merely a cognitive function, it is a moral and spiritual practice. How we pay attention shapes not only what we see, but who we become. Dr. McGilchrist's work gives us framework for understanding what Oliver intuited poetically: the right hemisphere's broad, open, vigilant manner in which attention allows the world to present itself to us in its wholeness, its context, its living reality, and the left hemisphere's narrow, focused way of attending, which grasps and manipulates, categorizes, and controls. Both are necessary, but as Dr. McGilchrist has shown us, the question of which mode of attention should be primary, which serves which, is not merely a neurological question, but a theological and an ethical one. When we attend to the world with a quality of attention that allows it to reveal itself, what we might call contemplative or devotional attention, we participate in a fundamentally different relationship with reality than when we approach it primarily as something to be used, extracted, or optimized. And this has profound implications for how we understand categories like belief and spiritual yearning. Belief in the slide, as Dr. McGilchrist talked about, is not merely intellectual assent to propositions, something we grasp with the left hemisphere's analytical attention, but rather it emerges from a relational encounter, something we participate in through the quality of our attention. This helps us understand the paradox that I'm working on, the paradox of spiritual but non-religious. Many describe these profound spiritual experiences as moments of awe, connection, transcendence, yet resist translating these into religious belief. Perhaps what they resist is not the experience itself, but the left hemisphere's demand to reduce that experience to propositional claims. From this perspective, the spiritual yearning persists because the right hemisphere offers us the experience of the kind of attention that is the beginning of devotion, in Oliver's words. But without frameworks that honor the relational, embodied, participatory nature of religious knowing, that yearning struggles to find its home in faith. We cannot think our way into it through analysis alone. Faith requires the kind of attention that allows us to be encountered, addressed, and transformed. And perhaps the spiritual yearning we observe among the non-religious is, at its heart, a yearning for the kind of attention that allows us to get our heads into heaven, to use the phrase of G.K. Chesterton, who wrote in Orthodoxy, "The poet only asks to get his head into the heavens. It is the logician who seeks to get the heavens into his head, and it is his head that splits." Yeah. This brings me to my second theme, Dr. McGilchrist's noble goal of raising up the body. The science of embodied cognition has demonstrated what contemplative traditions have long known, that our thinking is not separate from our bodies, but emerges from our bodily engagement with the world. Our concepts are shaped by the sensory-motor experience. Our reasoning is grounded in the patterns of our physical interactions with the environment. This insight fundamentally challenges the computational model of mind that has dominated both cognitive science and artificial intelligence, something I'm working on in my new project. We're not brains in vats processing abstract symbols. If cognition is fundamentally embodied, then intelligence cannot be reduced to information processing divorced from physical form. If interlegere means to read between, to discern, as Dr. McGilchrist just reminded us so powerfully, then intelligence requires context, particularity, implying an ability to distinguish among many options rather than just absorb information. And this brings me to my final concern here, artificial intelligence. We're currently building systems of artificial intelligence based largely on a computational paradigm that treats intelligence as abstract symbol manipulation. Precisely the model that embodied cognition challenges and that Dr. McGilchrist's work represents as a partial left hemisphere understanding. The ethical challenges we face with AI are not merely about bias in algorithms or privacy concerns, though these are very important. The deeper challenge is epistemological. We're creating systems that know without bodies, without situatedness, without the kind of devotional attention that allows the world to reveal itself. We are encoding a particular mode of attention, narrow, extractive, manipulative, into increasingly powerful technologies. This raises urgent questions about digital justice and epistemological diversity. Whose ways of knowing are encoded in AI systems? What forms of intelligence are valued and amplified? And what forms are marginalized and erased? When we build AI on a disembodied computational model of intelligence, we risk creating systems that perpetuate and amplify the very imbalances that Dr. McGilchrist warns us about. The dominance of left hemisphere modes of engagement at the expense of right hemisphere wisdom. Dr. McGilchrist, your work helps us see that the question, what is truth, cannot be separated from the question, how do we attend to it? And both questions ultimately concern our fundamental orientation towards reality. Whether we approach the world as something to be grasped and controlled, or something that addresses us, calls us, invites us into a relationship. As we develop increasingly powerful technologies, the question of attention becomes ever more urgent. Will our technologies encode and amplify a mode of attention that fragments, abstracts, and controls? Or can we develop technologies that honor embodiment, context, and the kind of attention that calls us to devotion? This is not merely a technical question, but a spiritual one. It asks us to consider what kind of intelligence we want to cultivate in ourselves, in our institutions, and in our machines. And it invites us to remember that how we attend is in the end about how we love. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mari van Emmerik. Very moving, and I'm sure that Iain already sits ready for answers. But I would like now to go on to you, Chris Oldfield. Thank you so much for being here too. You are a philosopher and a research associate at the Faraday Institute for Science and Religion in Cambridge, and have a very broad interest in the relationship between metaphysics and also consciousness studies, and actually also theology. I'm happy to give you the word. Please, Chris.
Well, thank you, Niels, and may I add my own words of thanks to Michael and this, not only this society, but Iain, especially, and the organisers of this occasion. It's a great honour to be part of this discussion. Thank you, Marie, very much. And Iain, for your love of wisdom and your very stimulating lecture. I do like the idea of a lecture, I like the word lecture, not pontificating as such, but as much as offering a reading of things or matters as we find them, as far as we understand them, in hope that, as Francis Bacon once hoped, our experience itself might be made literate. And I thank you for your lecture, very stimulating reading. In his 2023 Boyle Lecture, Rowan Williams drew attention, it was entitled Attending to Attention. Rowan Williams drew Iain's hemisphere hypothesis into a deep conversation with Maurice Merleau-Ponty's discussion of the salience of attention in the phenomenology of perception, and also with Simone Weil and her understanding of prayer. Prayer, a bit like Mary Oliver's beginning of devotion idea, prayer not understood purely as a verbal matter of performative action or utterance, or simply how to do things with words, a kind of conjuring, but as a form of attention, pure and simple. And Williams concluded in these words, they were music to my ears when I heard them: in the task of brokering the conversation between scientific discourse and the world of religious reflection and discipline, an attention to attention may yet prove a fertile field. And he concluded with a hope that these preliminary thoughts, he said, would contribute to a more systematic and extended treatment. And I share his hope. And to this end, I was very, very glad to see, Iain, your deep insights being received and made known in this context of the ISSR. And I share your and his and our mutual sense that there remains much to unearth in this field. Indeed, Marie and I actually, with Jonathan Young and Phui Himep and other collaborators, actually have plans for a research project tending to attention in the study of non-religion. So if that would be of interest to anyone, maybe we shall return to that if time and occasion affords. But far be it from me to recapitulate all that has been said or could be, but allow me to comment again on three turns which these lectures represent, I think, as a significant turn for those of us with interests in this field or these fields of science and religion. First shift, I think they will mesh interestingly with Marie's three, but my first shift I noticed in Iain's work was a shift from the propositional to the dispositional. For many years, and for perhaps too long, the focus in science and religion has been crudely construed as sets of rival beliefs or alternative beliefs about God or the cosmos or the natural world, as if everyone knew what that was or who that was supposed to be. For some, this has been allied with a sort of natural theological project of attempting to show the so-called naturalness of a class of religious beliefs, or even, dare I say it, primal world beliefs, or the function of religious belief, attempting to show the rationality of certain religious beliefs, or the reliability of certain religious belief-forming mechanisms. Now, with all due respect to the subject of David Ferguson's 2024 Boyle Lecture on whether it is indeed, quote, natural to believe in God, adopting McGilchrist's attentional stance puts a healthy question mark, I think, over the centrality of beliefs. Beliefs or religious or otherwise, or for that matter of coming to believe a set of propositions. A question mark which I think readers of the Gospel according to John, at least, we should remember that Jesus was often the first to place. We're reminded of an occasion in the second chapter of the Gospel according to John, in which certain men came to believe in Jesus because of certain signs of the times, perhaps. But at the same time, we read that Jesus didn't believe in these men at all. He didn't put any trust or faith in them, because we're told he knew what was in a man. And we meet a man, in view of what was actually occurring, we meet a man who is literate in theology and yet in a profound sense totally in the dark. Put another way, to quote the words of Jesus' brother James, even the demons believe and shudder. Now, I'm not placed to understand what that sentence means, but it should remind us that there is an interesting historical question as to why generations of scholars of true or false religion should have privileged the verb to believe and not the verb to shudder in that context. It's an interesting historical question, for which I would commend the most recent scholarly works of Peter Harrison and the late, great, dearly departed Maria Rosa Antoniazza. So that's the first shift from propositional to dispositional. A second shift I noticed was from epistemology to metaphysics, and maybe here's a difference I see things to Marie. I remember the late Ernie Macmullen once suggesting that the discipline of philosophy could be a bridging discipline between so-called science and religion, because of its focus on epistemology. Now, this may have been at the time, in the words of J.L. Austin, quite true, or true enough, but it may be quite misleading if epistemology is narrowly or crudely conceived or characterized, as it long has been, as a discipline of providing justification for beliefs or offering an analysis of our ways of knowing. In fact, as a representative of that tribe of AAA philosophers who have a tendency to resemble very small batteries from time to time, I might say that what the opposition is supposed to be between propositional and dispositional is a little less clear than you might think. Iain may be encouraged or perhaps discouraged to hear that dispositional accounts of what it is to believe that P or so on are actually quite mainstream in Anglo-American analytic traditions with which I'm familiar, at least. That said, however helpful it might be to think about what we should believe or accept on the basis of the latest scientific findings, or whether we should depend or not on our Maurean sense of things as they seem to us, it's my firm conviction that we would do well to follow Iain's lead in turning from matters epistemological to matters metaphysical, to things that are, to what is to come, to distinctions between what is and was, and perhaps what is to be. And third shift I want to observe with that in mind is a shift from the scientific image to the manifest image. I thought one of the most interesting things which Iain said in this lecture was how different ways of attending can actually bring different worlds into being. I'd like to hear more on that. Another thing I thought was very interesting was a note I heard of his turn to the real presences of persons and bodies, which may be fully present and yet somehow be beyond our current cognitive ability to grasp or recognize or cognize as such. I'm reminded of George Steiner's discussion of real presences there. We may be aware of ourselves as people at risk of losing all sensitivity to persons or to bodies, such as we are. In her book, The Brain Abstracted, Mashrita Chiramuta, who would be a wonderful discussion partner for all of us here, reminds us of the role of simplification in the philosophy of neuroscience, and that any analogy between biological brains, embodied parts of embodied agents, and artificial neural networks is just that, an analogy. But as with any analogy, there remains a difference in kind, which no amount of computational or representational power can ever make up for by successive degrees. Maybe just to conclude, I was reminded of the philosopher Gianni Vattimo's Gifford Lectures, in which he began with a reflection on a line from a Latin breviary from the Book of Hours. I think it said, "Redemisti nos Domine Deus Veritatis." I'm not a good reader of Latin, but I think it's something like, "You have redeemed us, O Lord God of truth." And he asked in what sense, if any, truth could redeem. In another context, I remember Judith Butler at the LSE saying we need to make truth sexy again. And from as disparate range of disciplines as Vattimo and Butler, I think this question of how the notion of truth, the truth that could redeem, that could set us free, that could become sexy again, could ever be captured in a mere mathematical convention of a model theoretic notion, such as Tarski's convention, T. I must confess that while my ears were attentive to the lecture, my eyes were also drawn to the work of art and imagination on display in the setting, above which Iain was speaking. Above the altar was a gigantic coat of arms with crossed swords, but suspended beneath the crown and the altar was a sculpted metallic figure of the form of a Christ on the cross. What was quite striking to me was beneath the shimmering and shining metallic exterior was a kind of darkness inside that at first glance might appear to be empty space. I could almost hear the voice of the women, last at the cross, first at the tomb, saying, "They've taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they've put him." In the Gospel according to John, chapter 20, we're told that some people spotted the linen, blepe, that someone, Peter, contemplated the linen, theorai, but it was the beloved disciple who saw, eiden, and came to believe. In my reading, the Gospel account invites multiple ways of seeing, attending to what on earth is going on. And for that gift of attending, I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, for these very important issues, and I will now go directly on to you, Marius Dorobantu, who is an assistant professor at the Free University in Amsterdam, and actually you are in your own mission statement on your own research. You are saying that you want to nourish a mutual enrichment between artificial intelligence and religion. And I don't know whether you will go this pathway today, but at least the word is yours.
I will. Thank you, Niels. Thank you, Iain, for this wonderfully stimulating and thanks everyone. I see that there are about 50 people in attendance, so it's wonderful to share this science and religion moment together. It's a celebration for our field as well. So I am an academic theologian, and I felt a couple of touches during Iain's lecture. But before I press on anything, I just want to say very clearly that I think your work, and this lecture in particular, matters a lot theologically. For most of the modern period, theology has had to argue from a very defensive position, granting science the authority to describe what is really going on, especially neuro and cognitive science, and then asking rather pitifully whether there might be still room for God somewhere in the margins. What you have done across the Master and his Emissary and the Matter with Things, and now with this Boyle lecture, refuses that settlement. You've shown that the most careful attention to the brain actually almost vindicates the theological vision instead of dissolving it. I'm talking here about things like the primacy of the implicit, of the embodied, of the metaphorical, about the elevation of relationality as prior to substance, about rethinking truth as a disposition, not a proposition, about highlighting how attention is a moral act, and the list, of course, could go on forever. And you've done this remarkably from within science, showing what good science actually shows us. And as a theologian, everything you've said and done is music to my ears, because it means that theology is no longer in the position of asking for crumbles from the scientific table. Your argument contributes to reopening the conversation between science and religion, which many of us, at least of my generation, had grown up being told that it was closed. And it reopens that conversation from a common ground rather than from a negotiated truce. So I listened to your fascinating talk with my theological antennas maximally stretched. And here are a couple of things I'd like to hear you develop more or respond to if time allows. Should you not want to engage with any of my points, you can always simply say, well, I'm not a theologian, so I don't need to deal with all that. But first, and half jokingly, I think that overall you argued that the Judeo-Christians have it right when it comes to the what, the content of belief, who and how God is. And then the Easterners, and especially the Buddhists, have it right when it comes to the how. So how to attend, how to live, how to think, how to get to God and to spiritual enlightenment. Is that a fair, albeit simplified take? So when it comes to the what, I heard you mention the incarnation, the Trinity, the kenosis or tzimtzum. When it comes to the method, to the how, you spoke about sunyata or emptiness, about active passivity, non-doing, the horse parable, meditation, and so on. So as a Christian, I actually don't mind that kind of mix very much, because it seems that I get to keep my Christian doctrinal commitments and also incorporate this cool Eastern ethos. So I get to have my cake and eat it too. But I'd love to hear whether that division in your talk was really intentional or accidental, or maybe I'm exaggerating it. And to press a little bit more on that, I wonder whether there is place for a distinctively Christian how in your framework that you propose. Because apophaticism is, of course, fascinating and obviously the more truthful way to speak, or rather be silent about the nature of the divine. But there's also a lot in Christianity that is not necessarily apophatic, but cataphatic, without necessarily being that kind of left hemispheric, sterile, propositional content either. I'm referring here to how God, through the incarnation, becomes nameable in a particular first century Galilean body. So while the apophatic refusal of language is, of course, in one sense, the only right approach to God, what makes Christianity Christian and scandalous is not its apophaticism, but the cataphatic eruption of the divine word into flesh. So you say that language refuses God and God refuses language unless it's the language of poetry. And I'm wondering whether that leaves the other genres of language that are neither the two extremes, the very right hemispheric subversive poetry, nor that kind of very left hemispheric analytic systematic theology that you rightly criticize. But the in-betweens, I'm speaking here about genres such as scripture, preaching, creeds, about the kind of articulated proclamation we find in liturgical language. So again, this is just because I argue for better or worse from a Christian theological framework. I just wonder whether leaning too far into the apophatic dimension risks losing the specificity of what makes Christianity Christian, rather than a sort of a general mysticism. So you masterfully remind us that God is not the end of a theorem, but I would like to add that at least for the Christian, God is not just an unnameable name. We know a little bit more. And my other point is about AI, and here is where I bring what Niels anticipated. So you treat AI as the apotheosis of left hemisphere dominance. And you rightfully criticize our obsession with it and our mistaking it for a genuine intelligence. I'm with you on all that. But I would also like to complicate things a bit here and get your reaction. In your lecture, you gave us Indra's net, where each jewel is suspended at an intersection reflecting every other jewel in the net. You gave this as a metaphor for the interdependence of all that is. I want to borrow that net for a bit because it is strikingly resonant with Christian ontology, especially the Logos theology, which sees the world as a web of logoi, small capital L, logoi, which are rational relations. So each created thing bears within it a meaning structure that participates in the one divine capital L logos, through whom all things were made. So these logoi are what makes the world intelligible at all in patristic theology, from Justin Martyr up to Maximus the Confessor. And Indra's net is, for a Christian, a net of logoi, and every jewel reflects every other because every jewel is grounded in the same capital W word. So everything is grounded in the divine word. Now, consider what a large language model does. It is trained on the entire textual deposit of human culture. So from Augustine and Shakespeare to the Psalms, but also to technical manuals and even Reddit comments. Its outputs are statistical distillations of human speech. And if reality is indeed a net of jewels, of logoi, and if human language is the medium through which we articulate our participation in that net, I think we can see the extraordinary success of generative AI in a different light. You rightly see it as the left hemisphere building a mirror of itself. But in the celebrated tradition of both and, I think the success of AI may also be evidence that the logos in human speech is more pervasive, more pattern forming, more catchable than we had dared to think. So I'm not saying that AI is conscious or spiritual. I agree with you on that. But I suggest that the theological engagement with AI can be more than just an extension of the left hemisphere diagnosis. So not only what does AI take away from us, but also what does it reveal, if anything, about the whatever it is that exists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marius, and thank you very much to all three of you. And according to the little liturgy for this discussion, I now hand over the word to you, Iain, either to respond to what have been said to you, or also to expand on some of the points that just are around in the horizon of what you have said. Thank you. Please.
Well, gosh, I feel a little overwhelmed. Thank you, all three of you, for your very interesting and well-articulated responses. I'm very grateful for you agreeing to come and do this at all, but listening to your responses, they would require an awful lot of thought that I'm not sure I can quickly bring to bear. But let me have a go at responding to some of the things that you brought up. I thought they were all very interesting responses. Perhaps they should be published somehow, actually, given that the lecture has been published, but that's nothing to do with me anyway. So let me take the responses in the order that they were given and begin with Mari. I like the way, of course, that you made attention central to your reflections and pointed out that it has these different aspects, that it is, of course, it can be intellectual, it is moral, it is spiritual, and it has emotional depth or lack of it, depending on the kind of attention that's offered. And I was thinking of, I didn't know the Mary Oliver that you quoted. Thank you. She's a poet I like very much. But I was thinking of some quite well-known remarks to the effect that love is pure attention. In fact, that is what Louis Lavelle, early 20th century French philosopher, said. La vraie charité est une pure attention à l'existence autrui. And then there was Simone Weil, who was mentioned, I think, by Chris, who said words basically to the same effect. And what are we meaning there? It has both deep and more, if I can put it, everyday meanings. Obviously, there is a sense in which giving full, open, charitable attention to somebody is an act of love and is generative, healing, creative, and important. But there is also a general stance towards the world in which we are not simply in that unfortunate detached position that has been enjoined on us in the West for 250 years or so. And I was reminded today of the fact that, I think I mentioned this in the Master and His Emissary, that the word in Japanese that is used in science for observe, the word that we it was observed. Well, I mean, you cannot get more removed than it was observed. It's nothing like I saw. But the verb in Japanese, kansatsu, is a word which is most closely translatable as gaze. So a kind of rapt attention in which you are not putting yourself into it or trying to grasp something out of it or make it into something that will fit into your theory or scheme, but in fact offering a generous attention to see what actually is there. And that's the hardest thing to do. To see what is right in front of your nose. I think Wittgenstein said something like that. But the words come to me very strongly in relation to both science and philosophy, that we can get so hung up on our particular schemas that we actually prevent that rather rare thing of the world speaking to us. And it was the world speaking to me as a child, before I had, well, child, but also an adolescent, before I had enough time to have a general scheme into which to fit things, that really assured me that there is spiritual depth to life, that it speaks to us, and it speaks to us with a deep truth. And I like the way, Mari, that you mentioned yearning. I think it's important to emphasize that there is something, a longing, which is part of the spiritual tradition, which is almost the opposite of wanting. Wanting is possessive, but longing is a going, in fact, it's in the word, it's a going out from yourself to something. Langian in Anglo-Saxon means to stretch out, and it is that feeling of being, yes, other than something, otherwise there can be no relationship, but also connected. And it's that holding together the distinctness of an individual and the connection. And I think that actually would lead me, but I won't go there now, to something to do with what Marius had to say. You mentioned, I think, the importance of not just private spirituality, but a shared set of beliefs. Let me use that difficult word, because I'm going to come to that shortly. And I've written about this recently. I gave a lecture at Pusey House and it was published, and I've been interviewed about it. And I feel increasingly uneasy, as I always do when I'm asked to identify myself with a particular position. I mean, that may just be cowardice, but I think it's that I do always see the good and the bad sides. And I think people worry that I've been attracted to something about the history of Christianity, I suppose, in particular, that can be criticized. Good heavens, every human enterprise has its dark side. Every human being has his dark side. And as Solzhenitsyn said, the line between good and evil runs right through the human heart. But I think we mustn't throw away the baby with the bathwater. I was very impressed by Pope Benedict's saying that the only justification, I mean, that's quite some words coming from a pope. The only justification for the Christian church is the saints that it has brought about and the great works of art that have grown in its bosom. And to me, those are the things that really matter, and I agree with that. But here, to go a little bit Eastern, because I have that in me as well, as you've all noticed, and I like the idea of certain little daily rituals that can be brought into life. I mean, they're part of the Christian tradition as well, of course. They're more part of the Eastern Christian tradition, but they're there. And they're there in Buddhism, and they're there in Judaism. Little acts of gratitude, of yes, of a resonance. You see, it's about a resonance. It's all, to use a word I use, or I think I coined actually, betweenness, which doesn't mean just what goes on, as it were, between two things, but is the transformation that comes over the elements that are in relation through the very fact of their being related. They both become something new, not of course utterly different from anything that other people would recognize or than what they had been before or will be in the future, but nonetheless they are born anew every time. And so every encounter we have in the world is like a piece of music that is encountered anew every time it is played, every time it is heard. It is still that same piece of music, but the experience of it is different. And the world doesn't fall apart because we accept the difference as well as the sameness. So those elements, the ability to hold things together, but also to stand back from them, I thought you hinted at there, and I resonated with those thoughts. And then to move on to Chris, I liked you also had a lot to say about attention that I agreed with, and I liked your remark that prayer is attention. I don't know what to think about this, but St. Francis of Assisi said, when you pray, you must ask for nothing. In the bit of Christian education that I got, we were taught the acronym ACTS about prayer: adoration, confession, thanksgiving, and supplication. And it seems to me that there is room in prayer for each of these, but the point is taken that largely one is there to listen. Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth, not to make a case or to concern oneself with what one feels one needs. You talked, Chris, about belief and truth, and I have said these things at other times. I don't know whether I can't now remember whether I mentioned them in the lecture, but of course belief can mean quite different things. Beliefs are not just propositional, they are also dispositional. So that by allowing me to prioritize the dispositional over the propositional, you wouldn't be saying goodbye to the concept of belief. The word belief is in origin about love. It's there in German, lieben, belief, and it was there in Elizabethan English, where we had this concept of one's lief Lord, one's lief friend, ally, whatever, the person that one felt an allegiance to and a love for. And that allegiance is also behind the idea of faith. Faith is not about facts. Faith is about a disposition of loyalty. And that is, of course, what the whole idea of faith, fides, fidelity, is. It's not knowing, it's being in a position of not knowing for certain, having many intimations, and being true to those intimations and beliefs. And I think that is for me, what do I know? But for me, that is the nature of the spiritual quest. It's not something that can be easily put into categories and stages and written beliefs, and yet I also don't want it just to collapse into a sort of pietistic disposition that some people might consider sentimental. As always, I think my life has been absolutely tormented by the need to say something on the one hand and on the other. And I think that I accept the need for both. Epistemology. Yes, and I agree with you that metaphysics is more important than epistemology. But unless we do some epistemology, unless we examine what it is we think we're doing when we're approaching truth, because there are different paths that people have traditionally taken, unless we inspect those paths, evaluate their strengths and weaknesses, then the business of metaphysics is without its necessary underpinning. And I'm sure you didn't mean that it should or would be, but those are my immediate reflections on that. You liked me to say something about attention bringing worlds into being. And I do, it may sound a bit mystical, but I do mean this in a very real sense, that a transformation comes over oneself and the world, and the dyad can never be sort of ruptured. The world is always a world as present to the one who knows, and the one who knows is dependent on what it is that their knowledge, their sight, their attention is directed towards. Depending on the kind of attention, the world can change. It can change its depth. It can, in other words, its sense of resonance with deep things inside one, or become shallow and empty. It can become an indifferent, fatalistic place. It can become somewhere where, although suffering is involved, one finds a sort of home, a place of rest. I could go on, but I don't think I need to. I think the point is that a way of disposing your attention to the world, which can easily be dictated by beliefs, I mean beliefs of the of the propositional, very propositional kind, those, for example, of reductive materialism, which are inculcated in many, if not most, children at school in their science lessons, unthinkingly. I mean, I don't mean that there are people tub thumping, but I do mean that silently, or not so silently, certain assumptions are ingrained in the way of thinking about the world, because science tells us the truth, we are told, and indeed it can, but it does depend very much on how it approaches what it is trying to illuminate and what it excludes. Unfortunately, for 250 years, the only kind of things that have been admitted are those that are reproducible, visible from the outside, and can be, as the French say, precisified, we don't have a word, but can be made, rendered precise. But most of the important things, I'd say all the important things, can only really be understood by a kind of inside knowledge, and inhabiting the difference between savoir, knowing the facts, and connaître, experience of something. And these two are both required. I'm not saying that one alone will do, but science does say that one alone will do, and it says it very definitely. It's had to stop saying it, more recently, the physicists stopped saying it 100 years ago. Biologists, always slow on the uptake, very, very late in the day, are beginning to see that that necessarily is the case. So those, yes, and another thing I liked about something you said was the different kinds of seeing, of course, that we tend to use one word. We can use other ones like contemplate or to gaze, as I say. But generally speaking, we think of seeing something as a straightforward phenomenon, but it isn't. And I love the way you talked about the three different discoveries, as it were, of the meaning of the cloths, the vestments. And then, sorry, I'm talking too long. I think I'm overstaying my welcome here, but Marius is next. And Marius, thank you so much for what you had to say. I'm glad that you made the point that you sort of vindicated my use of neuroscience, because there are people who I tend to suspect can't really have read what I've written, or if they haven't really understood much of what I'm getting at, who say it's terribly reductive of you. But I think you will agree, and those of you who have read and I think understood what I have to say, I don't use it in any reductive way, but I use the tools of science to help open the windows of science to the world. There is a sense in which you have to begin with what it is that people already have some faith in. It's no good beginning with something standing, well, from where I am, I see the world like this, and you see it like that. Well, I don't know how we're going to communicate. But actually, I think it's very helpful that it's not a ploy, by the way. It's something that spontaneously occurred to me over a long period and with a lot of work, that these different ways of being in the world are, no question at all in my mind, instantiated in the two hemispheres of the brain. So thank you for making that point. And you alerted me to something I hadn't really reflected on at all. A completely new point, that somehow the Western tradition gave a what to things, and sometimes that is rather absent in the Eastern tradition, which seems so purely apophatic. So there is something good in that, and that perhaps the how that I tend to espouse, I do tend to move towards the Eastern religious traditions, wisdom traditions, but I do also find extraordinary riches in the Eastern Church, the Christian Eastern Church. And rather late in my life, starting about 15 years ago, I'd never really known much about Judaism, but Judaism has been an untold source of wise images, insights. I think the Kabbalah is one of the most profound human creations. So I get it exactly, that there needs to be not just apophasis, but cataphasis. By temperament, from my experience of it, where I have encountered it, I am not well equipped, apparently, to embrace a rather positivist, evangelical, this is the written word, this is what it says, this is what it is. Images and music are irrelevant. Metaphors are not what we're on about here. We're talking literal truths. For me, of course, that is anathema. And I say, of course, but I mean, on the basis of what you know of me, you will probably see that. But I love the way in which you brought liturgy in there as a way of embodying it. You see, when I said poetry, I was really using a shorthand. What I was saying is that only a kind of yes statement of what is, it's necessary, but it can only succeed if it has that quality of embodying the implicit, bringing the unspoken to us, so that it is a positive statement, but not falling into legalism, literalism, and all that is entailed in that approach. So I think you rescued me there by being literature, because literature is something I think is incredibly important. And I do think that it succeeds to the extent that it is poetic in nature. I'm using that fairly loosely. But I think that there is one way in which you can actually destroy a liturgical tradition. I've seen it happen in the only tradition that I have ever really inhabited, which is the Anglican tradition. In my lifetime, it's kept on rewriting the liturgy, and it's got more banal every time. And that's supposedly to get closer to a truth that will be understood. But what is to understand truth? It's not by that kind of a path. And you talked about the fact that, well, I won't go into that actually, but what I will do is I'll go to AI and the net of logoi. Difficult. Intuitively, I'm not, I mean, certainly my intellectual position is as yours, that AI cannot, it is not conscious. It is also not embodied, and that is no small thing, as Mari pointed out. It's profoundly important for human understanding, for all sorts of reasons, because it's through the body that we meet, approach one another. It's through the body that we feel emotions. It's through the body that we suffer. And suffering, like joy, is part of the necessary experience of somebody who wishes to pursue a spiritual path. Even Viktor Frankl, who, after all, lost most of his family, if not all, in the Holocaust, and himself survived the death camps, said that one of the things that contributes to fulfillment in life is suffering. Not that you should in any way espouse it or go out of your way to find it, but that it is inevitable, and it is a gift as well as a terrible scourge. But the net of Indra. See, I see it differently. It's not data points, which is really all a computer can connect, that are connected. It is something almost as big as souls that are connected. And so the network that is being spoken of, to me, is the network of the spiritual, the soul of the cosmos, the world soul, the fields of consciousness that ground everything, and that we are for a while not severed from it at all, the opposite. But whatever we are is like a limitation of it for a while, and out of limitation comes something new. I mean, this is, I could talk for an hour and I won't, but how important negation is in creation. And the limitation, the bringing, the filtering, if you like, of consciousness that occurs in every individual soul through their brain, through their experience, through their life, brings about some new enriched something that wasn't there in the cosmos before, and is now to be taken back into the cosmos as a whole. So nothing is severed. at any stage in this process of differentiation and reintegration. It's that dance of the differentiation and the reintegration that seems to me profound and important. Goethe said that dividing the united, uniting the divided is the whole work of nature. And I'd go beyond that, although I suspect he realized that it wasn't just living nature, but the whole of the cosmos is, as David Bohm saw, this something that is differentiating itself, that is explicating itself, and then reinfolding itself into something that is now richer. I see this as a necessary progress between the right and the left hemisphere. If we allow it to happen in our culture, we take what the left hemisphere has done to what the right hemisphere has seen as the end of the story, and that will be for us the end of the story unless we're very careful. I think there's more I would say, but I think I must stop there.
Thank you so much, Iain McGilchrist. And I just want to give a word also to you, Michael, because you actually made the response there. And it seems that what you actually called for, a balance between the right and the left in this terminology, is actually what we've been talking about. But I think you might have other observations or questions.
Niels, that's very generous of you, but I'm happy to just say thank you ever so much to the erudition of Mari and Chris and Marius, and I think Iain's done an unbelievable job of managing to respond off the top of his head to 3 very deep sets of comments. So I've just enjoyed listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. And you have actually now taken the words out of my mouth, but that is very apposite for a past president of ISSR. We also have Brian here. Welcome here. It has just been a pleasure to listen to the questions, the very open questions, but also to the very open answers, which are actually answers like not concluding answers, but opening up for further thought. And I've been very much enriched by both your lecture and by this session here. So on behalf of the International Society for Science and Religion, I wish to thank you all for participating in this discussion, especially to you, Iain McGilchrist, and to you, the 3 respondents. Thank you.
Thank you, all of you.
Thank you.